our second webinar in our IrBEA National Conference Series, COP26, the critical role of bioenergy. We're delighted to welcome you this morning, and apologies for the short, the technical glitch earlier. We went live a little earlier than we expected, so I apologize for slight delay in getting started. So this morning we will discuss COP Goal 2, adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. And we have a very distinguished lineup of speakers for you this morning, including our Minister Hackett, thank you for joining, Michael Kottner from IrBEA Biogas in Germany, Chris Johnston from AFBI Northern Ireland, and our Vice President, Maurice Ryan. So we know that the Minister is under pressure. We do thank you, Minister, for joining us this morning. We know you have a very busy schedule. So we'll go right into it, and we'll ask you to make your opening remarks. And I know that you have to be away in a few minutes, so there probably won't be much time for questions, but hopefully maybe on another occasion we might get a chance to chat to you in more detail on a forum like this. So over to you, Minister, and thanks very much for joining.
Absolutely, and thanks, Sean. And yes, apologies for the very swift nature of my visit here, such as the many moving parts of politics and government business. But anyway, listen, just to thank the Irish Bioenergy Association for inviting me here today to join you in these discussions ahead of COP26. The Irish Bioenergy Association have been at the forefront of promoting bioenergy, the industry in Ireland, and have made a significant contribution since they were formed in 1999. Next month, as you know, at COP26 in Glasgow, we will see countries from all over the world come together to accelerate action to deliver the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Unfortunately, as we all know, the world is not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and clearly, you know, greater collective action is needed to meet this goal. We know that with rising temperatures, we put pressure on vulnerable communities, on vulnerable habitats, and indeed species and habitat loss are, you know, linked to global warming, and we really must strive to reduce the emissions and increase removals. The UN goals are the main focus for COP26, and I think the webinars organised by the Irish Bioenergy Association have been really are useful to allow people to share knowledge and put in place measures that will make a difference. I'm the Minister with responsibility for land use and biodiversity. I'm acutely aware of the important role that land use can play in, you know, delivering climate change mitigation, and obviously in the importance of conserving valuable habitats. The Programme for Government recently published its Climate Action Act, and it sets out objectives to achieve a climate neutral economy. And for me, forests in particular and land use will play a significant role on that journey. Discussions on the next Climate Action Plan are well underway, and these will be published shortly. And the plan will focus on the measures to not only reduce emissions, but increase removals that are required under national and international commitments. The Programme for Government, as you know, commits us to a 51% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is a really massive and challenging task and a challenging ask. And but it is necessary if we are to transition to the net zero economy and a net zero society over the coming decades. And obviously it's not just Ireland who are doing this. This is, you know, across the world. This is European levels. Other countries have higher targets than we have. So we're all in it together in very much the greatest sense of that statement. Obviously within this context, renewable energy is going to have to play an important, massive role too. Within agriculture, the Ag Climatised Roadmap, which was published by my colleague Minister McConalogue last December, sets out clear vision in terms of what the sector can deliver in that. Within that, we've identified opportunities for farmers to increase the supply of biomass from our forests for heat production in particular, to explore the potential for opportunities for anaerobic digestion and to reduce agricultural energy use, while also deploying renewable energy technologies in our most energy intensive farming systems. And farmers are already engaging with some of those. The Programme for Government also outlines a commitment to a national land use review. And this land use review will include farmlands, forests, peatlands, all types of land use. It's really a cross-government initiative. And it's necessary so we can, as a government and as a country, can generate optimal land use options, which will inform relevant government decisions into the future. The review itself is already underway, and it will balance environmental, social and economic considerations and involve a process of evaluation of the ecological characteristics of the land. Sustainable land management is obviously a major contributor to reducing many negative effects of climate change on us all and in our own environments. I have also established Project Woodland to address a number of work packages within the forestry, within forestry in Ireland. And, this includes clearly as a single strand, and probably at the moment, very important strand of addressing the backlog in the licensing. Progress is being made, but I am really conscious that we have to continue that progress at pace to really, deliver a fit for purpose system within the forestry licensing process. I have initiated an independent regulatory review, which will take place over the next few months to examine the processes that not only occur in other member states, but to see what we can do to make our systems more efficient. So again, I think that will help inform us as we develop a new forestry strategy and come to a collective agreement what we want from our timber into the future. That forestry strategy is in the process of being prepared, and really will set the course of forestry in Ireland for the next 50 or 100 years. We will conduct extensive public engagement around that, and certainly I would welcome the Irish Bioenergy Association's input into those bilateral discussions as we chart a way forward for Irish forests. The Department of Environment, Climate and Communications has opened a consultation to seek views from interested parties on the potential introduction of a renewable heat obligation. And this obligation, if introduced, would require that suppliers of energy used in the heat sector in Ireland, that a certain proportion of that energy is supplied from a renewable source. The overall objective of a renewable heat obligation would essentially be to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the heat sector through increased use of sustainable renewable energy, and really contributing significantly to the programme for government's target of a 51% reduction in overall emissions. No decisions have yet been made as to whether an obligation should be put in place, and if there were one, how it would be structured. So that's what this consultation is all about, to inform that decision. It's open at the moment, and the closing date for receipt of submissions is the 29th of October. So I would encourage people to engage with that and make a submission. I suppose to further inform policy direction and the decarbonisation of the heat system, the SEAI are conducting a national heat study, and this heat study will produce a number of reports detailing options for decarbonising of heating and cooling sectors in Ireland to 2050. The report will provide insights in relation to the analysis of the potential for district heating, options to decarbonise industrial heat, opportunities in relation to waste heat, the impact of renewable gas network on renewable heat targets, the optimal level of electrification of heat, options for sustainable bioenergy and its impact on land use, agriculture and forestry, and the cost-benefit analysis for the range of options available. And it's expected that national heat survey will be completed shortly. I think the deadline was Q4 of this year, so hopefully that will be reached. So look, I suppose in conclusion, I want to thank you very much, the Irish Bioenergy Association, and to wish all the participants well in the discussions today and any further discussions, and for raising the importance of bioenergy in Ireland. The key goal really of government is to put Ireland on a pathway to reduce those emissions by that significant amount, and to really show leadership from Ireland as a country to deliver on this. And look, bioenergy is going to play a significant role in achieving that ambition. So look, just thank you very much for allowing me to address you. Apologies for the short nature of my visit, but look, certainly happy to engage further and explore all the opportunities here that exist. So thank you very much, Sean.
Very good. Thanks very much, Minister, and thanks for your contribution. And certainly we're very much open to getting actively involved in all of the work that you're engaged in terms of the land use strategy from a bioenergy perspective. Also, we have a submission ready to go. We've consulted with our members in terms of the RHO that your colleague, Minister Ryan, is leading out on. and very much engaged with the SEI in terms of their heat study too. We also published our own 40 by 30 report, which was a 40% renewable heat target by 2030, which again signifies the potential that bioenergy has in terms of heat. I'd like to acknowledge and thank you and your department for your ongoing support to us through the Wood Fuel Quality Assurance Scheme in terms of promotion of that. And also we're working with your government colleague, Minister, in terms of our EIP project, European Innovation Partnership Project on small scale biogas. So there's a lot going on in the organisation. I know that you don't have time for questions, unfortunately, but if any of our attendees this morning have any questions, we will maybe circulate them to you.
Absolutely, okay. Send them on.
Maybe you could come back to us with a response if
I certainly would. And if you haven't already sent on your 40 by 30 document, I would like to have a look at that as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I can forward it to you. Yeah,
brilliant.
Send it on to you. So thanks, Minister, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sean, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks very much, Minister, and thanks very much for joining us this morning. And so now we move on with our contributors this morning. So before I do that, I'd just like to briefly recap on what we discussed last week to set the scene for this morning's discussion. So our first speaker last week was Paddy Phelan. Paddy very clearly is our IrBEA president and very clearly outlined the work of our association and the role of bioenergy and the strong role of bioenergy in decarbonising all of our heat, transport, electricity and agricultural sectors. We then heard from Paul Dean, Dr. Paul Dean, post-researcher from MARI, and he very clearly stated that we need to look at the science, a need for early action in terms of bioenergy, and that bioenergy is not capturing at the moment the political and social mindset and limelight, but that we cannot put a plug on everything, is the direct quote from Paul, and that bioenergy will be needed and make up 1/3 of our primary energy in the future. Herman Dacker from the IrBEA, European Biogas Association, questioned why we don't have a mainstream industry in Ireland and highlighted the the strong pace that the industry has developed across Europe in terms of rollout of biogas plants. And then finally, we heard from Christian Rackett, who told us about the significant and sustained growth in terms of the installation of wood pellet systems across Europe and the importance of the need for bioenergy right across the world in terms of our challenges we face. So this morning, we discuss COP Goal 2. So our first speaker this morning is Mr. Chris Johnston. Chris is from IrBEA in Northern Ireland. Chris, his title is of his presentation this morning is to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats and the role of biomass crops in that. Chris is the project leader in environment and renewable energy research based at IrBEA in Hillsborough. So we're very grateful for Chris for joining us this morning. And I would encourage you to post any questions you have in the chat at the bottom of the screen. So I now hand over to Chris for you to take us through your presentation and give us your thoughts on how bioenergy and energy crops in particular and biomass crops can help and achieve this goal that we're talking about this morning. So over to you, Chris, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sean and Teresa. Can I check, are you seeing the two screens? Yes,
we're seeing the two screens now, so you can just, yeah. And
there we go.
Now we are seeing your slides. Thanks very much, Chris, and hand over to you.
Okay, apologies for that, just as it's a default. Yes, thank you for the introduction there, Sean. So my name is Chris Johnston from the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute. I'm based up at the research farm in Hillsborough. And I want to talk here about sort of interpreting the adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. I want to talk about some of the multifunctionalities we have on biomass crops and where biomass crops could indeed lead and help us with the number of different agenda that we have moving towards 2050. Essentially, when I'm talking about biomass crops, I'm really talking about the overall societal need for carbon resources. And you'll see why I'm saying that, because some of the policy direction, certainly UK policy direction, is sort of kind of agnostic about biomass crop. But one thing that we're very sure on is we need the carbon resources going forward. So we are talking about woody tree species and grass species and fiber crops, a number of different biomass crops and non-food crops. Biomass fuel, of course, we are well aware of, and the Minister mentioned this morning renewable heat obligations, but also we're aware of heat support schemes in the Republic as well. or to displace fossil fuels. But you know, ultimately there's other multifunctionality aspects which can very much help us towards these goals. And we're talking not just about bioresource demand, therefore we're talking about environmental protection, and I'm going to touch on that, where we're talking about water quality, especially in an agricultural context, waste management, very much so in a societal context, biodiversity improvements, as carbon sequestration, and then more and more talk obviously about carbon capture and bioenergy carbon capture, and that's somewhere where bioenergy can most certainly play a very significant role. Obviously these are strong diversification opportunities for agriculture, but you know, the profits have to be there as well. And then I'm just going to finish off and mention briefly the opportunities for some high value compounds and some research that we're involved in on that basis. But I want to focus here on for the next 10 minutes or so on woody species, specifically willow, fast growing woody species. And you know, why are we looking at this crop? Well, there's a number of reasons why this crop has a big role to play in Ireland, and it has a, you know, ultimately it has a high establishment, it has a high yield, it grows well, it's got high transpiration rates, which is necessary for a number of the multifunctional uses we put it to. We have progressive breeding programs. Most of the willow that was planted in Ireland back in the late 90s, early 2000s really came from about 2 different breeding programs, one European, one English one. There's a number of other breeding programs now coming up with some really good genetics. So the progressive breeding programs, we have good established management and agronomy and husbandry practices, and IrBEA and Biogas have, you know, together written some widely used best practice guidelines on miscanthus and willow cultivation. We know that the crops efficiently remove nutrient, which is useful for waste management or for land remediation, and it protects groundwater. And how is it doing all of this? Well, ultimately, the literature is very clear in the fact that it does increase and it improves soil hydraulic conductivity. It brings soils into a much more kind of vibrant, especially when they're poor soils, into sort of a vibrant space. We've got increasing carbon, increasing microbial activity, we've got root turnover, we've got increasing soil organic carbon. There's a number of different reasons why indeed the crops improve the soil. So this bit I want to summarize what's happening sort of from a I suppose from a point of view in the UK, the way that policy seems to be developing, or whether discussions are happening, and a number of people in the sector are actually calling it heady days for perennial energy crops. And the reason being because we haven't really seen so much discussion or hope, in inverted commas, for quite a long time, not for 20 years or so. And I just want to run over some of the things that have been published this year and where these discussions are coming from. So we had the International Energy Agency report earlier this year, which actually does focus and states very clearly the demand for, or the need for, much greater level of bioenergy crop production on marginal lands. We need woody energy crops, and it mentions something about woody energy crops and the energy ratio of them, land carbon dioxide integrity certification, but it's the advanced feedstocks, wastes and residues and woody energy crops is specifically mentioned in that report. Then we come on to the 6th Carbon Budget Committee on Climate Change. And again, there's mention in there very clearly, low carbon solutions, expansion of low carbon, and it even quotes 260,000 hectares of farmland shifts to producing energy crops. Think of that what you will. Then we come on here to the Committee on Climate Change Land Use Policy for Net Zero UK. It says UK needs to plant 23,000 hectares every year till 2050. That is an enormous acceleration and increase in bioenergy crops or biomass crops. And then recently there was the consultation earlier this year from BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in GB, all about how we can actually get towards achieving these particular goals. And then they culminated in some bids for biomass feedstock innovation programs. And I'll mention a little bit about that, because this has indeed got the whole energy sector, the biomass crop sector, quite excited about the potentials for biomass crops going forward. And with this, they've launched 24 different projects, or they have funded 24 different innovation projects. And then there's also discussions within, or reports written within the EU. And again, both Biogas and ourselves and IrBEA have been involved in the scripting of a focus group and a publication on sustainable industrial crops and what opportunities they can exist for in the EU. And then we get things like this a couple of weeks ago, where there's a declaration by one of the UK's largest energy producers, working hand in hand with the National Farmers Union in sourcing biomass crops, you know, locally, indigenously. And these kind of things, I suppose we haven't really heard about since Broaden Ammonia was doing it maybe 15 years ago. So these are quite exciting. But to come back to the BEA's biomass feedstock innovation program, which came from all those policy documentations, 24 projects funded, and these 24 projects fund a whole range of biomass crop. I did mention the department was quite agnostic about their use, but 11 of them are still involved in the perennial energy crops that we know about, miscanthus, willows, even hemp is in there as well, eucalyptus, poplar. These innovations are including the development of better multiplication, planting, harvesting technologies, propagation technologies. There's innovations in there for molecular and fast track breeding. There's also a decision support tool project in there as well. Obviously, if we're going to accelerate biomass cropping to the degree to which the aspiration is, we're going to need a way to get that information and that dissemination out there. It's not just going to be a matter of a consultant going to each and every person wanting to do things. It's going to be too much. But just to mention as well, more locally to home, this was our land management strategy published a number of years ago now, about 4 years ago, which actually did indeed recommend the implementation of biomass cropping within the intensive livestock agricultural situation we have in Northern Ireland. So it was recommending woody riparian strips and biofiltration blocks to capture pollution and interfere with overland runoff. And I think this is quite an interesting, quite a useful way to sort of improve the sustainability of agriculture. Heavy livestock agriculture, where we know there's water quality problems across the whole island. And more or less at the same time we were doing that, we had some EU funding which enabled us to set up some experimental work at IrBEA Hillsborough. And the experimental platform I want to show, I'm showing you here, is really kind of a controlled runoff platform where the wastewater will run from the left-hand side of your screen down to the right-hand side of your screen. Sorry, not rainwater, wastewater, rainwater. So rain will fall on that field. And we know through the last 30 years of data collection that there is a kind of a legacy P runoff from that field, as well as that, the field is used in normal agricultural procedures. But the rainfall will run off down the pathways. It shows 6 pathways here, and you can see there's willow planted at the very end. 3 of the runoff pathways are willow, 3 of them are grass, and really all we're doing is monitoring the overall volumetric and indeed the quality of the effluent that runs out the bottom end, or the runoff that runs out the bottom end, to kind of surmise therefore what effect is willow actually having as a riparian protection on what is exported into the water environment. And that's been running only for a number of years, so it is preliminary data. But what we are actually starting to see quite clearly as well is a cumulative decrease in overall phosphorus discharge. Now, I've just looked at particulate phosphorus here, but we're looking at a whole range of different phosphorus species and nitrogen species as well. But what we are seeing here is an overall decrease. So the blue line represents the cumulative loading of phosphorus that is being discharged from the willow buffers, and the red is just the normal grass buffers. So what we actually are seeing here is a big, please. What we're seeing is a big reduction in effluent, that is, or in P that is being discharged from the site. So we've taken that a little bit further, and we have run a LiDAR on the farm in Hillsborough to kind of pinpoint, if you like, where the hydrological connectivity between the agricultural land and the waterway is, where they're joining up. And this LiDAR, you can see here, it uses the LiDAR relief modeling, soil modeling. One of my colleagues has done that. She's far more equipped to talk about LiDAR analysis than I am. But we've got a certain number of green spots, which are indications and points where discharge is leaving the land and entering the water environment. So what we did is we've just kind of taken that then, and we have decided, well, let's use that area, and let's use it as a demonstration, and we will implement a buffer strip around that area. So then here's what we have at the moment. So I got a nice sunny day, the drone up, and we can see that the willow plantation is now really nicely established. We are monitoring water coming into the catchment upstream and indeed downstream as well with the 2 arrows. And this is being operated as very much as a demonstration and as a research, but as a knowledge transfer site within the Catchment Care programme. Catchment Care is an EU programme led by Donegal County Council, and there's one work package in that which allows us to develop and demonstrate a number of different activities using willow plantations. What we are seeing from this, and although it is early days, again, it was only planted in 2018, what we are seeing though, from my colleague Russell Adams and some modelling, where he has used some well-recognised tools to model, is we are actually again seeing a decrease in the overall loading of total phosphorus from that catchment. Now, in time, we'll get a far better idea how this is actually working, but if it's anything to go by, we're getting a similar kind of a data through the modelling and the ongoing analysis as we are from the area, the replicated area, which is there in the red line. So this is really quite encouraging, and interestingly and usefully, it is encouraging a lot of people to come and actually see the site as well. We have moved on with that as well. We've taken the whole Hillsborough farm and we've pinpointed a number of points where we are definitely having discharge into the water environment, and we have planted those up to try to mitigate the discharge from the farm. We are monitoring this whole farm and water quality at about 9 or 10 different places. And it's worth mentioning, we use all the wood chip that we grow on site. We harvest it, we process it, and we use it within our district heating system, displacing fossil fuel year on year. And the more willow we have, the more self-sustaining we are within that pursuit. So now I just want to talk briefly, I've got a few minutes left, I want to talk about some other activities that we are doing with energy crops, biomass crops, willow crops specifically. And it's working with utilities on point source wastewater management. So within these systems and within these schemes, what we are essentially doing is engineering a wastewater irrigation solution for wastewater. Instead of being discharged to the natural environment, into the water environment, we want to recycle those biomass crops with the effluent, with the pollution, if you like, but with that nitrogen, with that phosphorus. We want to irrigate those willow plantations with that wastewater. And we are running these systems, they're running automatically, they're taking environmental stimuli, soil moisture, air temperature, soil temperature, historic data on application volumes, and we are irrigating the wastewater to those willow plantations. And these pictures, if you haven't, or if you're not aware of these kind of systems, will illustrate what we're really doing. So there are pipes running through a willow plantation. You can see one there irrigating. It shows a spray. Normally we don't get a spray, but it wouldn't be much to look at if we didn't get a spray. So I've used a photograph with a spray, but we've got points within that willow plantation that irrigate the effluent into that plantation. And then whenever it's harvested, the biomass is removed off site and the whole thing starts again, and the willow grows up very quickly again to be continued year on year. Worth mentioning at this point now, what is some of the data that we're receiving? Well, this is a site that was built in the previous EU project with Donegal County Council, and it is a 14-hectare site which has been receiving discharge since about 2014. And we've been monitoring this very closely in terms of its efficacy and its effect. And what I'm trying to show in the two graphs on the left is, I think it's an interesting point to show that the brown bars illustrate the volumes of effluent that come into the wastewater treatment works, and the green bars illustrate the volumes that we're actually able to irrigate into the willow plantations. And what we're seeing here is a really significant proportion of the wastewater that runs into the treatment works is being discharged to the willow plantation, especially through the spring and summer and late summer months. And of course, those are the times when the willow plantation is best at taking all that nutrient. It's growing ferociously, it needs the water, it needs the nitrogen, it needs the phosphorus, but also that coincides with the time that the receiving water, the stream, the shuck, the river, whatever it happens to be, may well be least capable of taking a discharge, a high nutrient discharge, because of its lower flows, its warmer temperatures, its higher light. So you can see it will be more vulnerable to both chemical and ecological pollution. So it would seem very much that these two technologies can work hand in hand to reduce the strain in the water on the receiving water body in terms of its quality, but also in terms of promoting the production of biomass through a circular economy and through nutrient recycling. And I think these two things, work very well hand in hand. The graph I've just popped up there is just a summary all the way through the number of years since 2014. I've basically looked at the percentage overall is discharged, which is the blue line. So it's about 50% of the overall yearly inflow, but actually it's just over 80% of the summer flows. So it's very similar to the graphs on the left. And then, of course, we know that where we can calculate the actual volumes of nitrogen, the volumes of phosphorus that are being recycled and not being discharged and wasted, ultimately ending in pollution. We also know there's a good carbon argument in here. We haven't done as much work on this, but taking that particular example that we showed, we have harvested a lot of biomass over the years. The crop grows well. It's a significant amount of CO2 that is fixed within that bioresource to do with what we will. But there's also a significant amount sequestered. And of course, by using the biological system to manage and treat this wastewater, we're then negating the need actually at the wastewater treatment works for power use, for aerators, for pumps, pipes, valves, aeration systems. So there are a number of different CO2 saving opportunities. So then just want to finish now very quickly on where we're going with this next. So again, within the EU Catchment Care project, we are again trying to link up within certain catchments the potential of remediating, if you like, or bringing into far better compliance a number of wastewater treatment works that could have been operating for a long time, may now be showing them their age, may be showing overloading, but could ultimately be having an effect on the receiving water body in terms of its chemical and its ecological status. And we're doing this piece of work with the University of Ulster. So we are in the middle of developing 3 more, potentially 4 more small wastewater treatment sites as proof of concept demonstration to prove that we can actually link the production of biomass cropping with environmental protection and environmental improvement going forward. And then very finally, I did mention that we are trying to find ways to improve the value of a crop. No one's going to grow a crop if there's no value in the end, unless, of course, there's other stimuli to plant it. But one project we're involved, which was led by University of Limerick, is we are investigating a number of specifically chosen genetic genotypes of willows, and they come from established biomass variety, but also close to market biomass varieties that could very easily be brought onto market very quickly, very easily, especially through these new innovation funds from BEIS I mentioned earlier. And specifically what we're doing is we are assessing them for salicylic acid. So we work with a number of commercial partners within this project as well. And if we can kind of further the development, if you like, of these high-value compounds from biomass crops, and I think it could not just be an environmental crop, it could also be quite a useful commodity crop as well. And that is just a quick picture of one of the plantations. This one is in Loch Goal Research Station in Armagh. There's a similar site in Claremorris, County Mayo, and 2 more sites in France which are doing the exact thing. And finally, just some really nice, pretty pictures to finish off with the biodiversity in SRC. There is a myriad of literature out there as to all the different benefits that short rotation coppice willow can actually provide. Pollination services is the big one. The willows, the whole different stream of genotypes of willows produce nectar at all the right times whenever other crops within our landscape really aren't. So we can really kind of provide the nectar during those very lean months. And there's as I said, there's endless amounts of research in there on birds, butterflies, predatory arthropods, bats, and just a few pictures showing some bits and pieces. So that is a very quick fly through. Sean, apologies, I think I might have been a minute or 2 over, but hopefully that's given a bit of an introduction. Thank you.
That's great, Chris, and thanks very much for your very insightful presentation. It just shows the potential which exists from a biomass crop perspective in many aspects. If I could just ask you maybe a couple of very brief questions. I think there's a couple of very interesting things that stood out to me in terms of your presentation. The one was around the 23,000 hectares in the UK up to 2050. Is there any policy measures that they're implementing to make this possible, or do you think it's going to be achievable, or because it seems very ambitious? But
it seems very ambitious, Sean. I agree with you, and I think so I think one of the figures which I mentioned earlier in the Committee of Climate Change was 260,000 hectares. That 23,000 I think equates to 720,000 hectares. A lot of people do scratch their heads over that. Yes. But climate change and the climate emergency, we scratch our heads over that as well. So I think you need an aspiration. The BEIS Challenge Fund, which I mentioned about, once those 24 feasibility studies have been done, they will then invest. I think it's another 20 million or 40 million in phase 2 projects, which will really kind of upscale Now, how that happens, it's really hard to tell. It's a very difficult question. I'm really glad I don't make policy.
That's okay.
But yeah, it's a challenge.
It's just important, I think, it's very ambitious, but it's very good that it's there, that it's a target. One second question, in terms of the riparian strips at IrBEA, how often do you cut those, or do you stagger the cutting? So does it impact if you, say, for instance, cut it all out, then is there a potential loss of nutrient from the runoff in that period where it's starting to grow again, or is it a staggered cutting of the strips?
Yeah, those are good questions, actually, and similar questions from my own policy guys within DERA here as well. What I actually am minded that the crop is harvested more regularly than possibly we would do for a bulk biomass crop. Specifically, what that can mean, therefore, is we can get sort of lighter machinery on, and some of these innovations that Blaise are talking about, from what I know, that is where they're coming at as well, is perhaps harvesting machinery that can get on site, which by their own intent will be damper, wetter, harder to reach. I think harvesting it all down and leaving the crop bare for a certain length of time isn't actually that big a deal. What we've discovered from a long-term trial, and we published it in Biomass and Bioenergy about 3 years ago, was a long-term experiment on wastewater from a farmyard, far more nutrient filled than a primary effluent from the wastewater treatment works, by the way. And we've been irrigating that year on year, and even after harvest, we still did not see any issue with nutrient leakage, nutrient leaching. There was no particular issue. So my own view would be that, yes, okay, the biomass is all gone, but it grows back really, really quickly. And meanwhile, we've got that whole soil plant root system and the rhizosphere that is just sucking that water in, making nutrient ready for the next crop that goes up. So there is the opportunity for staggering, but at the same time, you need to talk about the actual economics of getting a harvester in twice, and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I think these things are all to be experimented with.
Very good. And just one final point, we are talking about Goal 2 today, which focuses on communities and natural habitats. You mentioned at the very end about pollination services. And would you envisage that policy could and supports could potentially put a value on that in the future, and maybe pay farmers or growers for that service that they're providing? Or is it measurable? Is it easy to measure that? And so just maybe your thoughts on that from a policy perspective.
My immediate thoughts, Sean, are I would love somebody from DERA policy to come in and take that question from me. My role is very much is to try to provide the facts and the evidence. Okay. And I think where I've come from with the waste management and the water quality is we can start to really put figures now. We can start to get some real factual data behind how well it works. And do I see that potentially that could be included in an actual value? Yeah, absolutely, of course. Pollination, there are proper biodiversity researchers who'd be far better to speak to me about that. But if you're talking about environmental services and the ELM scheme in GB, and I know there's still discussion going on in that, then all these services, values for environmental goods have got to be included. Surely, that's where farming is moving to.
And I think that's a big challenge for bioenergy, because we always speak about the energy benefits, but it's sometimes, and I think as time goes on, it will be easier to quantify the non-energy benefits, and that there are examples that you've outlined in your presentation that could be valued and could assist in helping making it viable for farmers to be involved in the production of these crops. So thanks very much, Chris, and again, thanks for your ongoing support to IrBEA and interactions with us. I think we very much value your opinion and your technical input and expertise. So thanks for that. And I will bring you in again on the panel discussion later on. I'll now bring in our next speaker.
Thank you,
our next speaker is Michael Kochner. We're delighted to be joined by Michael from Germany this morning. Michael is topic this morning, or title of his presentation is Biogas Technology Development in Germany and Europe, the Innovations, the Trends and the Examples. Michael is CEO of the International Biogas and Bioenergy Centre of Competence, IBBK, Vice President of the German Biogas and Bioenergy Society. And also our engagements with Michael have extended to being involved in and helping and assisting to promote very good and excellent training programs which Michael runs on a regular basis for interested parties in terms of biogas in Ireland and right across Europe. So, and I'm sure, Michael, you'll tell us about your next presentation and your next training session as part of your presentation. So over to you, Michael. And I think very importantly this morning, you're going to very clearly articulate the additional benefits of a biogas industry, from fertilizer displacement and digestate and all the various aspects associated. Last week, we would have heard from the IrBEA about some of the policy measures, and you're also going to dwell on some of that this morning as well. So over to you, Michael, and thanks again for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to be part of this discussion. So over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean, for this introduction, and I'm very glad to be here today in the annual conference of the Irish Bioenergy Association, who I've been connected with for many years. I am there in Ireland, active in Ireland since 1995, where I was part of the team who erected the first biogas plant in the Camphill Ballitobin. Let's see if my screen sharing works.
Yes, you're sharing there, Michael, and I can see it perfectly. So yeah,
okay.
That looks really good. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so I will talk about biogas technology developments in Germany and Europe, innovations, trends, and examples. Give an overview of the sector in Europe and Germany, and then a typical setup of a German biogas plant, which is now spread all over Europe and the world, and then innovative projects which have come up, and they also have the benefit to be less dependent on financial support systems. So how does it look today in Europe? And I go right into the theme of biomethane. There are now 31 countries in Europe which have biogas plants, but only 18 have upgrading units to produce biomethane. This is a number, this is actually a printing error here for Ireland. We have one upgrading plant at this moment out of 725 in Europe in 2019. Yeah, this is a good development in Ireland, that also Ireland has now a biomethane upgrading plant. What we can also observe, not only a strong growth in generally biogas to biomethane, but also strong growth in the sector for bio-CNG, that's compressed biomethane, and bio-LNG, that's liquid biomethane, liquefied biomethane at 162 degree minus. Yeah, and also in the heating, in the building heating use, direct use, that is a big growth going on at the moment. So there's a demand for green gases we can observe. The total installed number, you might have heard last week already, it's close to 19,000 plants in Europe with 11 gigawatt installed electrical capacity. So you can see still most of the biogas plants are producing electricity and heat in a cogeneration unit. In Germany, that is, we come to it later, 10% of the produced biogas is used for biomethane upgrading. What we can also see that Germany is still the leader in the biogas sector with about 11,000 plants and about 60% of the deployment in the biogas sector, in the biogas plants, in the number of biogas plants. And the next is Italy, UK, France coming up, and so on. So Ireland is very much like here in the background. I think it's here 31 plants in the agricultural sector, but there are a few more in the sewage treatment and waste sector. Germany has areas with a lot of biogas plants. Our office actually is situated in southwestern Germany, here in this area You can see there are a lot of biogas plants alone in our town. Of 4,000 inhabitants, we have 5 biogas plants at the moment. The 6th one is under construction. One is very small. It's a pioneering plant from 1995, 7 kilowatt, and the biggest is the biggest is 1.5 megawatt installed capacity. There's a food waste digestion plant, and there are 2 newer agricultural plants there. The biggest biogas plant in Germany, in fact, or in the world I know of today, is 22 megawatt installed electrical capacity, or 5,500 cubic meter biomethane production per hour, because it's also producing biomethane. So it's situated here and in the close vicinity to Poland, northeast Germany, and northeast of Berlin. So those are the 2 extremes, and our average installed capacity in Germany is around 500 kilowatts. So basically, mostly small farm scale plants are prevalent. So that was the start of the biogas industry in 1992, where a pioneering farmer built a small-scale biogas plant, and they found a research plant, and they transported it to the farm to save costs. And this was an innovation at the time. That was a covered manure storage with an inner membrane here and an outer stable cover. You can see here the wooden beams. Nowadays it's blown up by air support. These were the first ones to be built, very cheaply built. This plant cost altogether less than 100,000 euros, between 80 and 100,000 euros. Now here we have a typical farm plant of a few hundred kilowatt. And of course, the installed capacity is higher, and also the prices are higher. We are talking about prices in the range between 5,000 and 10,000 euro per kilowatt installed. Then we could build between 2,000 and 4,000 euro per kilowatt installed. What was the reason? In the pioneering phase, we used to use spare parts. We used to use used parts, like this digester was transported from somewhere else for another purpose, used for another purpose. So this is not allowed, because it all has to be EU conform. The machinery has to be CE certified. The safety measures have to be in place, and so on. And also environmental regulations have to be met. This farmer just threw in waste from a chicken slaughterhouse into the mixing pit and pumped it into the digester. It was all digested, all fine. Nowadays, there has to be a clean and unclean side, and it all becomes more and more expensive. So this is a struggle, and I think Ireland has been struggling as well. How can we make the biogas plants cheaper? But the contrary is the case. They become more and more expensive, and that's a dilemma we are in, because with other renewables, solar PV electricity and wind electricity is becoming cheaper and cheaper, but biogas not. Well, how did the growth of the German biogas industry come about? You see, in the 90s, there was a steady growth through the legislation called the Stromeinspeisungsgesetz, the electricity feed-in law. And this provided a small levy on the electricity price. At the time, biogas plants received between 7 and 8 euro cents per kilowatt hour as a support. now the average agricultural biogas plant receives 22 cents per kilowatt hour. So that is a development. So the German Biogas Association has sort of pushed for that, and in 2009 we had a very good system where the support system was then gone up to 22 cents, and the growth was immense, more than 1,000 plants being built between 2009 and 2011 each year. Yeah, so a huge growth, and there were all the amendments. Yeah, here, and you can see as from 2014, the growth has somewhat slowed down, and now the forecast is for 2020, and that is still to be evaluated, but we know now that 168 plants have shut down because the 20-year contract, the 20-year good contract as from 2000 came to an end, and the newer renewable energy law, which is now a tendering system, you have to tender, and who is the cheapest gets the allowance to feed electricity from biogas into the grid. But that doesn't work for biogas. As I have shown before, we are in the contrary becoming more and more expensive because through higher environmental laws, higher labor costs, because to operate a biogas plant means to put in labor. So labor also becomes more expensive. So that's the difference of those new renewable energies. So more or less, wind and solar is a passive renewable energy, which you sit in the chair and wait until the sun shines and the wind blows. Biogas, you have to operate actively. You get slimmer by it, yeah. So here you see plants built per annum, 9, 10, 11, over 1,000 plants being built. Now, in fact, minus growth, minus 168. That's the situation now. 7,000 new plants in 10 years. These are the renewable energy laws as from 1991 when it all started. And you can see already from the text here, this law was 5 pages long for all renewables. Now, this law in 2021 is 350 pages for all renewables. So it's been a huge work increase, not only for the operators to look through that, but also a work program for the lawyers and advisors. That's actually that's actually a very sad thing, but that's how it has become. One light is that for small plants, they made it relatively easy because they still have a fixed feed-in tariff of 22.23 cents up to 150 kilowatt. If you use only manure, and the rest of the 20% you can use energy crops, or can use chicken manure. Chicken manure doesn't count to manure legally in Germany. I don't know why, but it is the case. And the other, you can use waste as well, but mostly agricultural crops or other manure. So, or 100% manure, and you still get the 22.23 cents. So that's what those small plants need in order to be viable under conditions today. Those countries who don't have that, and we have looked at this in our EU project called Bioenergy Farm and Biogas Action, where we were part of. You can all see that in the web, and we calculated the cases. Those countries who don't have that specific support for manure plants up to 100 kilowatt. 100 kilowatt, by the way, is 700 cows. So the manure is not very energetic. and therefore, yeah, you can see there is a growth in installed capacity, and that's another development in Germany. A growth in installed capacity we have still, but not a growth in biogas production. The growth in installed capacity is that the government saw that renewable gases can give a contribution to the stabilization of the electricity grid. Because if you shut off coal power plants, if you shut off atomic plants, you need a base load, and you need also something to come in with when solar and wind are not operating, and it must be quickly, within minutes. So you shut off the engine and you shut it on again very quickly. So this is an overcapacitation, and now we have an overcapacitation of about 1.2 gigawatt, up to 5 times the biogas production. So a biogas plant producing 500 kilowatt, the worth of 500 kilowatt of biogas for 24/7 is now operating only 8 hours, but then has an engine of 2 megawatt installed to really operate for 8 hours at 2 megawatt. And the other time it's the gas is stored. Yeah, well, what happens is that when politics or policies don't change, we will have a shut-off in biogas plants. By the end of 2035, we will have the same amount of biogas plants as we had in 2005 or in the year 2000, or between 2000 and 2005. So is that the goal we want to go to, or do we want to let the biogas plants run or even build new ones? That's a big question, which has to be resolved by the new government now. The typical setup of a biogas plant is, you can see here, that is first of all for heat and power. We have 9,300 plants, and we have biomethane production of 232 plants, or in 232 plants. And that's what you all can do. District heating, use heating send the biogas through a pipeline and do district heating far away from the biogas plant, or send the biogas, upgrade it and send it to the gas grid. Now we are talking about that renewable gases are very much needed in the future, and everybody's talking about hydrogen. Hydrogen is not a energy. It's not a stable gas. It's an energy carrier which reacts with other agents. So this is very difficult to handle. And if we're talking about biogas being expensive, hydrogen is 5 times as expensive as biogas today. So I'm a bit at a loss why biogas is not used more, because it's very much cheaper than hydrogen, and everybody is talking about hydrogen. We need to feed the biogas plants, and you can see a lot of manure is used, but also energy crops. And energy crops here in Germany is done with maize. Also some grain, but grass as well, and sugar beets. So it's actually cash crops which are could be used otherwise, but they're used for energy production. But this is going to be reduced through the REDII and EU regulations. We have to come down now to 40% energy crop use in the new plants. But at the moment, no such new plants are built because the conditions are really, really bad for them. What we also need in the future is that for a viable biogas plant that we need to use the heat more and more. Those biogas plants who have no heat use now, they will not be able to continue their operation because this income will be missing and will be lost. We can see here that a lot of the heat is used for drying processes, but also for heating, for local heating grid, for heating stables and district heating grids, and for industry not so much, and public buildings or greenhouses. And there are studies done, and most of the biogas plants use about between 50 and 70% of their heat. 100% of the heat is very rare, but it is possible. Yeah. So that is a very innovative biogas plant, which has a district heating network, has flexibilization. You can see the big gas covers on the digesters and on the post digester, and it has a drying hall for digestate. It has a dryer for grain, and it uses its heat also in a in an ORC unit to be able to produce more electricity from the heat. From 500 kilowatt heat, you can produce about 50 kilowatt of electricity still, and you still have most of the heat available for district heating. This farmer is using energy crops as well as agricultural and industrial wastes, and has invested into different other businesses of this drying here, of for own and external products, for as a bioenergy village with about 20 heat customers in the village, and an electric car sharing with electricity from the biogas plant. So that's a very innovative farming village with a biogas plant and an innovative farmer who converted his pigsty into a production hall for fertilizer, where he gets out a permeate after the membrane filtration. That's the runoff actually, or the water to be used for irrigation, an ammonium sulfate solution. That's a nitrogen fertilizer, then a phosphate salt, clean fibers to substitute peat, and fertilizer pellets from the raw digestate, from the raw solid digestate. So these are new innovative products from digestate, which can be offered to the fertilizer market from a biogas plant. And this farmer, who already has been in Ireland on one of our last courses, and introduced his project, quite interesting, and he's continually investing. So at some stage he will be self-sufficient and recycling all the products he has, the heat, the energy, the and the digestate as well. The problem is with the digestate, it is a better fertilizer, but at the same time, the fertilizer salts, the single salts and the single nutrients, are not in the composition most plants needed. So you will either have a phosphorus overload or a nitrogen overload, and this you can tackle with such a technology. If we're looking at the biomethane use in Germany, which is only growing at the moment in the transport sector, but in other sectors like the renewable energy law sector, where the biomethane is used for heat and power production, that is the most. That's about 90% of the use. the straight heat use, so straight biomethane burning, is around 4%. But and then we also export some of our biomethane to other countries. That will be increasing more and more now. Also, what is increasing already since 2018 is the biomethane use in the transport sector. We have 100,000 CNG cars and 850 filling stations. 60% of those filling stations have already switched over to biomethane now, due to a law change that is actually stipulated by the EU, that 6% now we need renewable fuels in the mix, and that can be easily switched over virtually. In fact, if a filling station is in the grid or is connected to the grid, and most of them are, they just buy virtually the biomethane from the grid, and there you are. You can fill up with biogas. We have 2 CNG cars, which we run 100% on biomethane. Also, tractors can be run with biogas. There's a new tractor from New Holland out now this autumn. It can be ordered now from each farmer. It has 4 bottles of it's high pressure bottles, one here, one there, and on the other side. And it has a full day farm work autonomy, 190 horsepowers. Very good tractor, very good way to reduce emissions from tractors. This could be done with a small, either decentralized filling stations on farms, which are theoretically there, but there's very little technology offered for on-farm plants. It's only for bigger plants. The upgrading plants are there. We could downscale it with membranes. That's what this farmer did, but there was very little technical support for such small systems. So he operated this filling stations from 2015 to 2019, but due to lack of support, this shut down. Well, I can just say, now we all want to go for hydrogen. This is a much, much cheaper option for the country and for the rural sector than hydrogen. But all politicians only talking about hydrogen. I don't know why, and this is not understandable. So I hope that also through this conference and that politicians are made aware of biogas and biomethane as a transport fuel. So the conclusion is that the biogas situation is changing due to new national legislations, and it means less support, in fact, in Germany. And now we have to see how to obtain income from other sources. But still, support is very much necessary. And if one compares the support which is now due to be given to hydrogen, biogas support is a fraction of that. And compared to biomethane now, the price of biomethane now is 6 cents per kilowatt hour. The price of hydrogen now at the filling station is 28 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's the discrepancy. And I'm not sure you have to catch the politicians to tell them we have biomethane now. This is available as a green gas, and it's 5 times cheaper than hydrogen now. And why not? Why are we doing it? Why aren't we doing it now? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael, for your very insightful presentation and giving us a very true and accurate picture of the situation in Germany. If I could, before you go off screen, maybe just pick up on a couple of points, and maybe can you just outline you've outlined the supports and the importance of policy measures to drive the growth in the industry. We haven't had any policy supports in Ireland of note. We had electricity support a number of years back, which did result in a number of plants being constructed. Are you, by the sounds of it, Germany is transitioning from exchequer-based support, so government-based support, to more market-driven supports, meaning obligation schemes and auction systems? Can you just outline, is that the case? And what are the challenges associated with that? Because we can compete even in Ireland as well in terms of renewable electricity, wind and solar, but they're not making a dedicated package for biogas or biomethane. We have to compete, and we can't compete on a cost-by-cost basis. So can you just outline from a German perspective, is that the case, that you're moving from more feed-in tariffs to the market support measures?
Yes, that is the case, but it's not a good case for biogas, as I outlined, because biogas is not only electricity production. Of course, if you look at the electricity production, then it's expensive, but you have all these other options. Recycling of nutrients, levering nutrients away from the water streams and so on, and environmental benefits. For instance, now there's a big drive of investors to use manure for fuel for vehicles, because this promises double the CO2 certificates compared to energy crops, for instance, or triple even. So that's why this where this this drive is going towards. But it's not that easy. They will also see that manure contains a lot of water, and water doesn't bring biogas, and the manure has to be carted around from a huge distance. And then if you want to put something up like that in Ireland, you start carting around lorries, and have lorries with tankers of manure, and this cannot be really the case. So I think for smaller structured agricultures like Ireland, and also Germany partly, and France and so on, they will have to invest into a gas pipeline system, to set up decentralized biogas plants and channel the raw gas into pipeline systems, rural pipeline systems, which are quite cheap. They've cost 50 euro per meter. So that could be a national task to do that, and then provide a bigger amount of biogas for upgrading and injecting into the grid, because most of the biogas plants are not close to the grid. That's also a problem.
Okay, just one final question. We have a comment come in as well on this from Patrick, but in terms of your point on hydrogen, you say 6 cent kilowatt hour for biogas, 28 cent for hydrogen at the moment. Do you see the value of, or the cost of hydrogen reducing in Ireland? I know, and Patrick has made the point here, that Ireland is looking at hydrogen from wind, excess wind production, to produce hydrogen. But do you see a situation arising that hydrogen, the cost of production of hydrogen will reduce? And would it ever be a point that it would become a similar cost to that of biogas production, or do you always see that hydrogen will be more expensive to produce?
At the moment, the cheapest hydrogen which can be produced is actually from biogas directly. Biogas can be put in a steam reformer, and that produces the cheapest hydrogen. It can produce hydrogen between 3 and 4 euros per kilogram. That's cheaper than from wind.
Okay, thanks, Michael, for your comments. And if I could just, we'll bring you in at the very end for just any final wrap-up questions. I'd now like to bring in Maurice Ryan. Maurice is our Vice President of IrBEA, and also is a Director of Greenbelt. So Maurice, maybe do you want to just turn on your camera and maybe just give us a brief introduction to yourself and your company and your organization? Can you hear us, Maurice?
I can, thanks. Yeah, I seem to be having some interruption on the connection for some reason. All of a sudden, just as I'm being asked to speak, so that's positive.
No problem. Well, look at we can hear and see you, Maurice, so that's good. So
That's a good start, anyway. Okay, so listen, thanks very much, Sean and Teresa, for arranging this and for inviting me to partake. And well done to Chris and Michael who've spoken already this morning. Very informative and really interesting points and topics discussed. So my name is Maurice Ryan. As I say, I'm Vice President of IrBEA. My day job is working with Greenbelt. We're a private forestry management company across Ireland, planting and managing and harvesting timber for private landowners. And obviously our role within IrBEA is looking at the supply dynamics of getting timber to market, mobilising timber from the private estate, and looking at valorising options for timber in the private estate. Our major concerns obviously around this are the current issues with the Forest Service and how they are not performing in terms of getting licenses out for new planting, which is at an all-time low, at levels not seen since probably 1940s maybe, and also from harvesting as well. So the future supply issues around timber to the market is quite concerning,
Okay, so if we just take a few questions, Maurice, maybe, and just have a short discussion. So the first one really, I'd like to focus on the government's reliance on the forestry sector in terms of emissions offset for society. But you mentioned that there's challenges associated with getting licensing and afforestation levels are at an all-time low. Maybe can you outline how you believe the trend in terms of afforestation levels can be reversed, and how do we make forestry a viable and attractive land use option?
Good question, Sean. Thank you. The Forest Service obviously have a massive role to play here to take control of the scenario and take control of the private industry. Firstly, obviously, to have realistic and practical timeline to issue new licenses. So, previously they stated that 4 months was a reasonable timeline to issue any license, and I think they should stick to that and get back to that timeline and stick to it. Currently, we're seeing licensing issue an average reviewed in quite a period of time. So the grants, obviously, people, it's getting tighter and tighter as costs for all materials, whether it be trees, planting materials, fencing, etc., need to be revised and looked at. The premiums then is obviously another aspect to consider to make it maybe more attractive versus other agricultural practices or other agricultural schemes that might be out there. There's also discussion by many has been suggested to us that perhaps the premium term length for establishing native woodlands be extended from 15 years as it currently stands, because it might be perceived as a less commercial crop, to closer to 25 or even indeed 50 years. And that's something maybe to consider. Obviously, there are issues around that from a government perspective, but certainly a topic to be brought to table. And I think maybe one other aspect we could consider is looking at how complementary, encouraging the complementary aspect of forestry in relation to other agricultural practices, and looking at the value it brings in terms of water quality management, carbon sequestration, and looking at forestry within the picture and the window of the broader agriculture, as opposed to maybe seeing it as a little bit more remote and on its own.
Okay, just to follow on to that point, Maurice, that's a very good point in terms of the policy discussions that are taking place around the CAP and the CAP strategic plans. Do you think, is forestry going to be addressed within the CAP strategic plan, or is it predominantly focused on the forestry policy, which the Minister would have mentioned this morning as well? So, and would you like to see it mentioned within the CAP strategic plans and a key part of that?
I think it's extremely important that it is part of the CAP strategic plans. To date, there has been very little interaction between the department and members of the forestry sector regarding the CAP development. They have an opinion that maybe there isn't a place for forestry in CAP development, but I think that's maybe a lack of appetite on their side. It's huge.
Maurice seems to have frozen out again.
Important that we are involved in it. Across Europe, we see the importance for us. the broader agricultural side of things and the role that it can play, as I mentioned, you know.
Okay. In terms of forestry and the broader benefits around community habitats, maybe can you give us an outline, Morris, from your perspective of the broader benefits of forestry? And obviously, that's going to be an important aspect moving forward. And maybe that's where the CAP strategic plan, and just to clarify for attendees this morning, by CAP we mean the Common Agricultural Policy, not the Climate Action Plan. So just to make that clarification, but could you outline to us the broader benefits of forestry beyond timber and energy potentially?
Absolutely, yeah, and we're beginning to see it becoming more and more important to people as time goes on, particularly as the climate discussions are more and more prevalent and top of the agenda. So certainly from a biodiversity side of things, the potential for forestry to improve biodiversity, and you know, we would be strong proponents of both the values of commercial forestry to the benefit of Ireland as a nation, from construction side of things, but also looking at the establishment of native woodlands and how important that is to improve the diversity of species across the country, to improve the diversity in terms of wildlife, flora, fauna across the country. Obviously, from looking at the water courses, and I know Chris sort of mentioned this, looking at runoff, etc. You know, the value that trees and woodlands and forests can provide on dairy, beef farming.
Apologies, folks. The joys of technology. We seem to have some interruption to Morris's connection. So you're back, Morris. We just lost you there for a second. Sorry. Okay. We'll have to maybe move on with our panel discussion. Unfortunately, we seem to have lost Morris again. So if I could ask Michael and Chris to come back on screen, please. And maybe we can pick up the last question to Morris when he comes back. So just regarding the whole area of sustainability, it's a big question from a bioenergy perspective, and it's always thrown at us from as an industry about its the importance of it, and we believe of its importance, and the Renewable Energy Directive governs our sustainability criteria and all of that. So maybe if you could comment, Michael, from a biogas industry perspective, you have mentioned about how there's a move away from maybe crop-based maize input and a reduction. Is there a lot of work going on at a German level in terms of this whole sustainability and the RED II directive and the criteria? And could you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of work going on, especially to the move towards using more manure away from energy crops. Also, the limitation in the new renewable energy law that there is only 40% energy crops now allowed. That goes clearly away. Also, the use of alternative crops, which are now grown, especially Silvium perfolatum. It's a flowering crop with a very good humus building up capacity, and it's a perennial crop, and actually cropping methods have been developed to plant this crop and then not have any fallow land for 1 year and not have any income and so on. So there are really a lot of drives towards alternative crops, but we have to still get confirmation if this is okay, because it's a land use after all, and it's clearly on waste, and it's clearly on waste products, and it's clearly on communal waste and household waste. That's where biogas should be used mainly. And crops, it's a big question. In Germany, we have this history that 2 million hectares were fallow land 20 years ago. Then there was this idea, let's grow energy crops on them. And now that's where we are. And
does that land go back into food production by being cultivated for energy crops eventually, or is?
Yeah, of course. I mean, food production is the same. So it's really also an agriculture policy. If all this land now would be thrown back onto agriculture, and we will have another overproduction of more milk, more meat, and so on, because maize silage and also the thing is that if you don't change agricultural practices, if you just say, well, stop biogas, stop using energy crops for biogas, there will be not 1 hectare less maize grown than before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Chris, if I could bring you in, and maybe, and I'll bring Morris in then. Sorry, Morris, we seem to have lost you on the Q&A there. We'll come back to you at the end. Chris, on this whole question of sustainability as well, from an energy crop perspective, can you outline the credentials from an energy crop perspective in terms of sustainability criteria?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely, Sean.
And I think a lot in your presentation, indeed.
I'm sorry just to miss the end of Morris's talk there, because I think some of that might have been very much aligned with what my views would be. You know, we look at our own agricultural landscape at the moment, and it is predominantly unwooded, and we're fairly multicultural in our agricultural outputs and our activities. I think what I was trying to show in the presentation earlier was the opportunity for biomass crops to integrate within our landscape in many ways, to improve the sustainability of agriculture, to protect water quality, protect air quality and soil quality as well, improve biodiversity aspects, and foremost, you know, we have a societal need for these resources, these bioresources, and to fix carbon. And there may be some people on the meeting today who have better ways to fix carbon, but to me, you know, photosynthesis does it really well, and we can put a lot of carbon down. And then what do we do with those bioresources afterwards? We don't necessarily have to burn them. We can pyrolyze them, we can gasify them, we can fix carbon in those ways. They can go into permanent supply materials. So I think everything about some diversification into biomass cropping, whatever those crops might be, I think is sustainability, every box ticked in many ways.
Okay, Morris, if I can bring you back in then on that point. You were outlining the broader benefits of forestry. Maybe if you could expand upon that and just maybe outline the future and additional value streams that can be generated from forestry, and how that will add potentially from a resource perspective, but also as a revenue generating perspective regarding forestry. So maybe, and if you could just comment on those two particular aspects before we conclude.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Apologies again for the connection issues.
No
yeah, absolutely. I see what Chris is speaking about there. I think there's huge potential for added value within the timber streams. I think we need to look beyond simply growing trees to cut them and burn them. I think we need to look at what is within the tree to see, can that be extracted and utilized to a much greater value. I know ourselves as a business, we are always exploring. We've always been at the forefront of innovation within the private sector, and that continues. And one of the elements we're looking at is biochar and the production of biochar, which we've been producing for a couple of years now, and seeing the application of that in soil amendment practices, particularly from reforestation, which, as Chris says, the best way to capture carbon, the most foolproof way, is photosynthesis. And by improving the rate of photosynthesis in soils, you know, you're capturing more carbon. That's there you go. It's simple. It works. You know, so that's one simple way, really, of adding a bit of value to particularly a relatively low product coming off woodlands and forests for the timber residue. So it's time that the industry works together and broadens its horizons to see it. You know, the scope is vast, and the more interaction and the more people like Chris and Michael that work together and develop these projects and speak about them, publicize them, and the more confidence your farmer and landowner across the country will have to actually commit their land and see it as a positive farming enterprise, as opposed to, you know, very often traditionally farmers have been reluctant to put land under trees or under energy crops because they might be perceived negatively in their local community. But the opposite is absolutely the case, where it's a very advanced form of farming. There's more return, less work, it frees up time, and you're not committing. You know, if we've done numbers where looking at an average return for a beef farmer, you know, in Ireland across a 10-year term, by replacing 20% of their land they have under beef, and this is just a desktop exercise, they're actually increasing their return per hectare by, I think it was 41% on an annual basis. And that's just simply from premiums alone. That doesn't include the timber revenue from it. It doesn't include the downstream activities or the carbon potential out of it. It doesn't look at the quality of soil, that the biodiversity element. It doesn't look at the water treatment side of things. So, you know, anyway, that's, I could keep going.
Well, I think, Mark, you've very clearly articulated the benefit. Just, I suppose, just to clarify that a lot of the material that will be going to energy is from obviously sustainable forest management. So it's thinning materials. So the high value material is obviously the lumber and the structural timber.
Yeah, and that won't change. I mean, we're not looking to try and chip away at what the sawmills are looking for. This is adding value to what is traditionally regarded as waste timber or you know, forest residues, which do go to biomass or pulp, etc. as it stands, but adding a bit of extra value to it. And the potential, you know, across Ireland within publicly owned lands, which is a huge land bank there. And I'm not just talking about Bord na Móna with their lands, I'm talking about the HSC and public bodies like that, which have areas that are very suitable for small amenity woodlands and project woodlands. They have a role to play as well. It improves local air quality, and so on, you know. So there's a huge potential there for.
Okay, unfortunately we've come to the end of our session. If I could just very briefly, Michael, just give you 20 seconds to have any concluding comments that you'd like to make, and I'll do the same for Chris and hand over to Morris to conclude the session. So Michael, just for your very brief concluding remark.
So biogas is clearly for the treatment and recycling of nutrients through waste streams. And this offers a possibility to produce green gases, which at the moment is more competitive than hydrogen. So biogas should not be forgotten with the hype for hydrogen.
Okay, Chris, just very briefly, if you could just give your concluding remark, and we can.
I can be brief, Sean.
Yeah.
I can be brief.
Yeah.
No, I think from whatever has been said, look, I mean, there's opportunities for biomass croppings. We've got this 2050 target ahead of us. This particular sector has a role to play, so let's get looking at it more seriously.
Thank you, Chris. And Morris?
Yeah, listen, I would just like to say on behalf of IrBEA, thank you very much to Michael and to Chris for their very engaging participation today. Really, really important, and it's been great to hear it. Obviously, what we're looking at with the COP goals, and it's really prevalent at the moment, is to see these activities and more being adapted and adopted by countries and by industry across the globe. You know, and we're looking at the habitat protection, for example, today. It's hugely important that this is driven on, and that bioenergy is certainly recognised as part of these COP discussions, and can be further advanced with that. And I think the role of IrBEA is very important from an Irish perspective, and it's an all-island perspective to help drive this along. And all of these sectors do need to be supported, and supported strongly as part of these goals. So personally, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who attended today, and I hope you found it engaging. Obviously, the recording will be available. And Sean, I'll just say. That's
very good, and thanks very much, Morris, yourself. So thanks to Michael, thanks to Chris, and thanks to Morris for participating this morning. Thanks to all our participants. Thanks to Teresa O'Brien for making it all work from a technology perspective and organising this. A lot of work goes in behind the scenes, which is unseen. So thanks, Teresa, for your hard work and efforts on a continual basis for the association. And finally, just to remind you that our next webinar will take place same time next week, and we will focus on Goal 3, mobilising finance. We will focus on the key aspects of what's important in terms of mobilising finance. It's part of the Bioeconomy Week, Ireland, so it's taking place in conjunction with Bioeconomy Ireland Week, and we will discuss the Irish policy and regulatory landscape, how that could be an impediment to the development of the large-scale projects, more so than the abundance of capital. But we'll hear a diverging range of views and inputs from a list of speakers, so I encourage you to register and to attend next week. So we'll conclude at that. I thank you all for joining this morning. Thanks to Michael, Chris and Morris, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.